Well, good morning. I'm recording a new video on Bill Dahl's article, Keeping Knowledge Alive. And hopefully I can keep this to about 30 minutes, if not less. And I think it's an important article for teachers for several reasons, and I'll go through that. The version that you're reading is basically from a lecture that he gave at LSU. I want to say about 5 years ago. Bill Dahl was my major professor. He retired around 2010. He passed away. I think it'll be 3 years this Christmas. And he and I had a long and close relationship. Without his efforts, I would have never received my doctorate. And he worked tirelessly for me, as he did for all of the students. But I gave him unique challenges and put himself out there for me several times. So it was very special whenever I have students read one of his works. I've been using this lecture for a while. It's now in a published form, but I have it scanned, which is not that much different from the lecture. But at least it would have, I think, a better give you sources and stuff that I don't think the lecture does. Anyway, so he developed this over some time. He doesn't, I don't think he mentions me in the piece per se, but I can say that particularly his work where he includes Wittgenstein, and I'll talk about that in a second, is very much based upon my influence on him. So let me share the screen and we'll get started. Okay. So, and this isn't my typical outline for this piece. I've just finished working on it a bit more. So, in our current era, where teachers are asked to teach to the test, and in which they are handed a prescribed curriculum, keeping knowledge alive in Dahl's sense has become a great challenge. So I think teaching has always been challenging. I think compared to, I'm going to say compared to 30 years ago, which is when I really entered into the doctoral program in curriculum and really entered into the world of teaching. And it was the introduction, it was the same year that, if I remember correctly, that LEAP was introduced, the LEAP exam. I think that's correct. Because the person who taught me a test and measurements course was instrumental in promoting that exam. And I argued with her that during that semester about the use of high stakes testing. And in fact, did my paper for that class, in which I believe she gave me a B. challenging high stakes testing, providing all kind of data. So, I mean, the people that promote high stakes testing, by and large, ignore the data. Now, the challenge then was that you as a teacher were much more involved in developing curriculum than you are now. Today, the challenge is to take the curriculum that's been developed and change it, form it to fit the needs of your students. For all of you, for those, the higher ed folks that are in this class, you know, you've gone through, most of you have gone through K-12 school. If you came to school, if you went to school in Louisiana, you know, under this testing regime. And how does that matter to you in your profession? And I would argue and we'll talk about this a little more, it's the over-methodization, if you will, of procedures for your workplace. And the overuse of training over experience, I think. And we'll get into a little bit of that too. The key focus of this course is an attempt to show you as a teacher that to keep knowledge alive and to let you engage in such a practice, to allow you to keep knowledge alive and to let you engage in such a practice. This, of course, is the point of the final curriculum project. So how do we do that? So, Bill Dahl and curriculum. What I think, particularly once he got to LSU, but I think this was prior. He arrived at LSU at the same time that I began my doctoral program. It took me a couple of years to finally take a class with him. And because other professors that were my major professors left, he agreed to be my major professor, and both to our benefit. So Dahl's focus, and I wrote about this last year in an article that was published. In his focus on curriculum, what he focused on was the second half of the word, culum, C-U-L-U-M, which is in Latin is how do I put it, a diminutive suffix. It denotes the shortening or the lessening of something. Curere comes from the concept of the circus, which is the giant racetrack that we would see in Ben-Hur, for instance. Chariot race. A curriculum in Latin originally referred to a shorter track, usually in the countryside, not in the big cities. So he wanted Dahl wanted to move teachers off the racetrack, okay, off the short track, if you will, using play. He derived his notion of play, Dahl did, from John Dewey. Dr. Dahl did his doctoral dissertation on John Dewey. And while he moved into other areas, he never left his Deweyan roots, which I think is important. And he brings some of that into the lecture. So he uses play. His use of play is a rejection of culum, of the shortcut. And the shortcut, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course. So the shortcut, you got some sense of this in the Harvey piece. If you've taken 504 or taking it now, Quest for Method talks about this. So the shortcut is Rames's shortcut, his use of the map, the diagram. That is the shortcut. It's a shortcut both in terms of instruction and in terms of what is taught. Okay, so Rames believed that you only teach the essentials, and you let the student then take those essentials and apply them to their everyday life and continue to learn through that process. Okay. We can debate that, whether the effects of that. Okay. I think for some students, it works fine. For other students, they need more. Okay. So I usually fall to students need more than a shortcut. And the logical consequence of the shortcut over 500 years is now teaching to the test. That is the ultimate shortcut. 30 years ago, when I entered into the curriculum program, the mantra for teachers was, you want to convert your students into lifelong learners, okay, independent learners. We were already seeing, for many students, they weren't achieving that in high school in the early 90s. Okay, and I think that is less true, particularly for traditional public school students. And it might even, whether or not it's true for, let's say, gifted students, I don't know. But it's only, again, the test is seen as what is essential. Not sure that that's true either. So Dahl really begins this journey, this academic journey, his scholarly journey, by coming out of Dewey, by looking to critique teaching method. He opposes method as it's laid out. So in Dewey, in his work, lays out a scientific method, but that is, a scientific method is not necessarily the same as teaching. And I go through that we go through that, I should say, in the Quest for Method. Those of you who take 504 get to read. So Dahl is the author, but there are other scholars that are part of the article. I already mentioned Dewey as being part of that. Dewey was part of the Harvey piece as well. So through these two readings, you're getting a little bit of John Dewey, more so you're getting more Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead. You have a minute, look him up on Wikipedia. Okay, brilliant man. Was a co-author with Bertrand Russell of the Principia Mathematica, which is the basic logical text for all of mathematics. Okay, begins a career in theology, comes to the United States from Cambridge. So what's interesting is Whitehead, like Harvey, comes out of Cambridge, like Wittgenstein, who we'll talk about in a second. All come out of Cambridge. I believe Whitehead and Wittgenstein were in the same college. Colleges in England are residential, they're not scholastic in that sense. And so that's an important connection too. Don't think Whitehead much liked Wittgenstein, as I remember. But Wittgenstein was Bertrand Russell's student. So, and your dose of Whitehead doesn't end with Dahl. When we read the next article by Huebner, the essay by Huebner on religious metaphors, Whitehead will reappear. And what I finish up with will be the lead-in to the Huebner essay. So, what is Whitehead's essays? There are two. You've been introduced to the rhythm of education. Now you're being introduced both to the reintroduced to the rhythm of education to a little more extent than I did with Dahl, but also the aims of education. And the aims of education, which is the first essay of a book of essays, Huebner picks up on. And what he says in the aims of education is, Whitehead, is do not teach too many subjects. You could argue that we today in secondary school particularly, and I would argue probably in middle school to some degree, less so, that we are teaching too many subjects. The curriculum is way too broad. We're trying to, and this is a little bit of my Ramus side coming out, because I think Ramus would agree. We ask too much of our students. We've accumulated so much knowledge in the last 100 years, let's say, that we're still trying to cram that knowledge into students' heads. And I would argue most students aren't up to the task. And it's not a problem with teaching, even in a testing regime. It's just, there's too much too quickly. There may be some of you that would disagree. But this is Whitehead. Do not teach too many subjects. But what you do teach thoroughly. Let the main ideas be few, so that's another aspect. So fewer subjects, fewer main ideas. You want them to be global. You want them to be easily generalizable. We'll get to generalization in a second. You can think of, we can think about it this way, okay, in my parentheses. Think of the standards as main ideas. That's, and so if you look at the plethora of standards, that's way too much. Even if you can cluster those standards when you teach, to have a student focus on that main idea. So many main ideas is, I think, difficult, particularly given I know we've extended the school year and have extended school, but the purpose of those extensions have little to do with the knowledge base and more to do with making teachers teach to their pay raises, okay? So there's just not enough time. There's too many disruptions, not even thinking about our COVID schools now, okay? We're not even sure what that's going to look like over time. So what you teach thoroughly, let the main ideas be few and important. Then let these main ideas be thrown into every combination possible. Okay. I argue that this is what depth of knowledge, right? A key Common Core concept. This is what depth of knowledge should look like. This goes back to Dahl's concept of rigor in the Harvey piece, okay? Whitehead argues the aimless accumulation of precise knowledge in training alone, or precision imposed too early, is self-defeating. Okay. So the aimless accumulation of precise knowledge or training alone, or precision imposed too early, okay, is self-defeating. So Whitehead wants romance to have time to take root. It's only when the students have become thoroughly engrossed in the topic that then you begin to impose some precision. Not ultimate precision, but some precision. Again, I think in the test, the high stakes test, the testing regime, by teaching you the test, particularly for high school students, there should still be romance. And we're trying to get precision too early. This is all self-defeating. That's why we don't see a large difference in our testing numbers. Occasionally will grow, but generally they become kind of stagnant, go back, come forward, go back, whatever. Whitehead says that the romance stage concerns itself with unexplored connections, kind of repeating, with the possibilities half disclosed and half concealed. I call this broken, this idea of half disclosed and half concealed. I think this is tied to the concept of broken knowledge, which Francis Bacon in the 17th century writes about. I did publish an article on this about 10 years ago. Okay. This brings us to Wittgenstein, who's really the fourth person in this piece. And this idea of romance, of throwing ideas together, and Dahl loves to do this. When Dahl taught, this was in a sense a kind of language play, conceptual play that he engaged in when he actually taught. I have some videos. I still haven't been able to edit them and put them in a form that can be edited, and I'd love to do that. But Wittgenstein argues someplace, this is in my dissertation, he says that to teach something, and Wittgenstein was a teacher for about, I want to say, 3 to 4 years. He taught math at a middle school level in small towns in the foothills of the Austrian Alps. Wittgenstein was originally from Vienna. To teach something is not to teach one thing. Okay. Again, this is what teaching to the test forgets. Okay. Concepts have multiple connections. So, and by focusing on the single idea, inhibits students' ability to transfer knowledge that they may learn in English, into math, into science, in science, to social studies, and social studies, back to English, and so forth and so on. Okay. As teachers, even in high school, making the connections between science and history, geography, government, to make connections between science and math, to make those connections between English and all these subjects, okay, and make those interconnections is important. And it allows students to transfer knowledge. Okay, something we forget. Okay. Dahl discusses at length with the Wittgensteinian concept. Actually, it's more Genovia's use of Wittgenstein, who's the author of the piece they use, of playing at, playing with, and playing in. Okay. I don't like the way this metaphor is laid out, because they're all senses of play, but it is kind of useful. So this initial stage of romance requires guidance. So that would be playing at, would be the romance is playing at. Precision is playing in, and generalization is playing with, okay? Because playing at, which is still play, establishes the ground for prior, or for knowledge base, prior knowledge, or background knowledge is the word I prefer, of all future learning. It recognizes Aristotle's concept that all learning, moves logically from what is known to what is unknown. Okay. Wittgenstein argues that you don't want to teach what is already known. And I think sometimes this is a problem in the way the curriculum is laid out, and this goes back to Harvey's notion of the novel. The unknown is novel. Begin with the unknown, connect it to the known, and then follow it back. Okay, even if you're trying to do that methodologically. But what our method requires generally is to begin with something that is known and then move forward. And I think we turn off students by restating what they should already know. Now, of course, assessment is important in that, to get to know, to find out what they do know. But the other problem is, in terms of the play idea, is that the difficulty with teaching today is that technologies, which is new knowledge, right? Which is difficult. You cannot teach new knowledge until it's matured, okay? The technologies are so titillating to our students, it's hard for the school to compete. By the time we get some new technological innovation into the school, another generation of technological innovation, because things move so rapidly in technology, have already come out, and the kids have moved on. Okay. Generalization is the final stage. In return, I argue that generalization is basically fluency. Okay, why is fluency important? I've got a little paragraph here, you can read it. Well, if generalization, as I argue in the Harvey piece, allows you to move to a new sense of romance, okay, that Whitehead's rhythm of education isn't fixed, it's constantly moving through, right, from romance to precision to generalization, back to romance, because now the romance is at a different level. But that romance, seeing the, generalization is seeing the connections, understanding the broader connections of the concept. It provides a power of knowledge that isn't available in the first encounter of that concept. And now the romance regenerates. But that romance requires fluency. You cannot have generalization without fluency. My greatest concern with the move to Common Core and now our Louisiana standards that are based on Common Core is that we've lost the ability to create fluency. And I think this is especially true in mathematics. Okay. Again, we can debate that, and I'm open, but this is what I see. So generalization leads the student to not just knowledge, but to wisdom generally, as you move through. And wisdom is another way to say you're an independent learner. So when a student gains wisdom, all right, which is what they need to be successful, I argue is what they need to be successful either in life or at the university. Although, unfortunately, I think that's changed as well. So Whitehead argues that by generalization, by throwing everything in relationship, by seeing the connections, you make knowledge one's own. This is not unlike Dewey's arc reflex, which I think I mentioned I believe I mentioned it as a footnote anyway in the article, the Harvey article, but it may be in the text, I can't remember, and I think I talked about it. Or Harvey's Genesis and Analysis and Genesis, where you have to complete the learning cycle. Okay, so you can't have generalization without a product, without a student engaged in some sort of synthesis, or better yet, genesis, because that's creative. This could be any type of project, creative writing, or essay. Okay. So let me finish. Whitehead's Aims of Education. Whitehead in Aims of Education says this. A little over the 30 here. Where attainable knowledge could have changed the issue, ignorance has the guilt of vice. Right? So if we cannot change the lives of our students, and I think that's what we all really want to do, okay? But if we don't change the lives of students, if we don't give them the knowledge base that allows them to live a better life, we don't move them beyond their original nature, to go back to the threefold tool, then what's the point? Okay. What's the point of being in school? As a giant babysitter? I don't think that's what, as teachers, we want to do. I don't think any of you want to do that. I argue that it is not about good teaching, but about good learning. Again, the notion of the independent learner. Teaching that leads to good learning is teaching that makes the teacher transparent, although ever present, but always hovering in the background and coming forward as needed. Okay, I will end here and hope everyone this is helpful, and looking forward to reading the next set of glosses. I'm trying to finish your Harvey glosses this weekend. Okay, take care.